Final Fantasy III is the first game I'm playing for Summer of Games, and there were a couple takeaways I had from my first day of playing. The first thing that came to mind was Final Fantasy III seems to try to work really hard to build a world that feels more lush than previous entries, like Final Fantasy II. A couple examples of this. It makes heavy use of Mode 7 in special situations such as cinematics near the beginning, the Chocobo riding scene where you can quickly run around the world. They try to use a behind-the-shoulder view of your character sprite along with Mode 7 to draw the world in order to give a sense of space. You can look down the horizon and see that the world's very far away, and at the same time you can see elements to the sides of you. It breaks the world out of that top-down, maze-like perspective that we're used to seeing in previous entries in the series. Also, the game uses larger sprites with more subtle hints of color shading on the buildings and the characters and the items, and this gives all the objects in the world a softer, rounder look, something a little more organic. This is a pattern that can be seen in other Squaresoft games near the end of the SNES's lifetime. I think it's worth noting here is it really makes the game stand out and looks like a much more polished and less technical product than Final Fantasy II. Also, along with that, when looking at the different towns, like the Desert Castle, for example, there's a lot of movement in the buildings. In previous entries, you'd see a wall that's made of stone and it's very static. But in Final Fantasy III, you get buildings with little spinning fans and little puffs of smoke and things moving around. Even people, you'll walk into a town and you'll see someone walk off screen, and instead of them just pacing back and forth in a loop, they'll actually go in a building. They're an element you react to. And this gives a sense of energy and life to the cities. You see that person walk around and all of a sudden like, I wonder what he's doing. So you walk into the building and that forces you to move your way to the different areas of interest. This really helps to engage me in the game. Honestly, walking in Final Fantasy III, I had some expectations for it to be a by-the-numbers JRPG, which admittedly in a lot of ways it kind of fits the bill, but these little touches help to break the monotony and give it its own sense of identity. Final Fantasy III also does a really good job of breaking up the gameplay. Traditional JRPGs have this common gameplay loop of battle, explore, where it's all about the random battles and hitting dialogue and then more random battles and occasionally getting loot. And if you've played a couple JRPGs, this can get pretty predictable. But Final Fantasy III at least tries to break things up a bit by giving you set pieces such as the rafting scene, where you travel down the river and you have to make choices about which branches to go down. Some of them loop, some of them don't. And even the introduction to the game itself. You don't start off with just this kind of plain, peaceful town where everything catches fire and then you're an orphan that has to take vengeance. They start you off in this little empowered introduction to the game where you're in a mech and you can cast a lot of spells, and it kind of shows you, hey, here's the kind of stuff you'll get to do in the game. Kind of like a Metroid game in that way. And that really makes the components of the game feel different and keeps things from getting stale. In addition to trying to build the world to feel more lush and varied, Final Fantasy III also works really hard to differentiate itself from other JRPGs that were made within the same time frame. For instance, from a story perspective, the group of heroes are not this kind of single group of destined people that are supposed to save the world. Instead, they are various actors in this conflict that's been taking place in the world. And while each of them are empowered in their own way, there isn't some Deus Ex Machina that's placing them in this conflict. You know, a king in a rival kingdom is going to get involved with a war with someone rising to power. That's just going to happen, and there's going to be a resistance because people aren't going to like it. It makes the character's circumstances feel much more natural and acceptable to me. Also, the game itself kicks off very quickly. Most JRPGs start you off in this small town where not much is going on, and that's about it for the first hour until you get used to the game. Final Fantasy III instead says, here's a bunch of spells, here's some mechs, go out, fight. This experience is going to be about more than just waiting around for something interesting to happen. This game also, interesting enough, is not afraid to give you mechanics that seem kind of broken. I don't think it's accidental. One example of this is the character Bannon, who you have to kind of protect when you're going down the river following his hideout getting snuffed out. He has an unlimited heal spell, and while it can be kind of troublesome to keep him alive, which may balance the mechanic a little bit, it felt empowering at the same time, and it was less about having a broken mechanic and more about, here is a character who his job in life is to heal. it gave the character some empowerment, and it gave the character some personality that was outside of dialogue and plot twist. And that's something I really appreciated. And the game's not afraid to play with that. Characters will have special abilities that no one else can have, and their job with those is just to make that character stand out. Each character is kind of its own unique pillar, as opposed to a bunch of archetypes that you have to fit your preferences into. The main antagonist of this game is also very interesting. Anyone who's kind of looked up this game on the internet has heard a lot of people talk about Kefka and how he's probably the best villain in all of Final Fantasy and all this. But I appreciate how they're treating him, at least in the beginning part of the game. If you play something like Final Fantasy II, the main antagonist through most of the game kind of appears on screen, hits everyone for a lot of damage, is really evil, then just pips away. This character, by contrast, is kind of this cackling goofball that you will never take seriously, and he doesn't succeed at a whole lot. He comes in and tries to fight you, you get away and make him look like a fool, but they also begin to allude even now of how sinister he really is. Now, he's kind of this dark, disgusting character who, just by circumstance, appears goofy. And I suspect this is going to end up paying off later in the game, and it's going to pay off in dividends because he's not just a mustache-twisting villain, he's kind of this sickly character. And really the last thing that stood out to me was a specific moment in the game where, when you're first getting introduced to the character Edgar, he's finding out that this person knows magic, and he's the only person in the world that knows magic, and so you have your battle, and most players instinctively will cast a magic spell in the middle of the battle to try to win. When you cast the spell, the fourth wall gets broken a little bit in the game, and the characters stop what they're doing and are amazed to see this person casting magic, something that people haven't done for hundreds of years. That kind of warmed my heart a little bit, because the other one's kind of a cute link to the player that, hey, these characters, they see things happening. But also to acknowledge that, you know, if you're really going into a battle and you saw something that you've never seen before, it's going to take you by surprise. People aren't just going to quietly accept it because the game mechanics demand it. That sort of attention to detail was something I really appreciated.